Okay, welcome again, everyone. Show about 2 after the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on data analytics and National 911 training standards. Before we kick things off, a few housekeeping notes. First of all, we'd like to invite everyone to join us to attend our upcoming Critical Issues Forum on these two topics, taking place October 6th through 8th in Denver, Colorado. You can get more information, register online, and make your housing reservations at nena.org/CIF. Our presenters today are going to be our CEO, Brian Fonts, and our Director of Education and PSAP Operation Issues, Ty Wooten. Brian will be speaking on the big data and data analytics portion, and Ty will be speaking on training standards. So with that being said, one more housekeeping note. We will have some time at the end to answer your questions. So if anyone would like to raise any questions or points for discussion, go ahead and use the question interface in your GoToMeeting application, and we'll be sure to get to those at the end of the presentation. One last thing, we will also be sending everyone who is attending live with us today a special discount code for reduced registration fees on the upcoming Critical Issues Forum. So thank you for being here today, and with that, I'd like to hand it over to our PSAP Operations and Education Director, Ty Wooten.
Thanks, Chris, and welcome everyone, and we appreciate you taking some time out of your busy days to talk to us a little bit about what we're going to be talking about in Denver at our Critical Issues Forum. And the first of the two topics that we're going to be talking about in Denver is, the first is the national training standards, and realizing that now is a great time to begin this process to get us to a national training floor where we can all work from and move forward from. And we all are very familiar with the fact that we have recognized throughout the country that there are many states in where you don't have to have any training or any licensure for or to be a call taker, telecommunicator, dispatcher for public safety. Yet other entities, whether it be a dog groomer or a barber or countless other professions, have to have those things. And so it is a great time to begin this process as we move from the model of where we are today in 6,000 independently separate 911 centers across the United States, and moving to, in next generation, a more of a situation of 6,000 interconnected 911 centers across the United States, and being the thought of being able to make sure that there is a standard of care that is met from one jurisdiction to another, no matter where you are in the United States, that everyone who calls 911 is going to be working and being dealt with by trained personnel who have a level of competency and training that they can move forward from. We recognize that there are many states that are out there that already have some sort of national training standards, whether there are states that have full training requirements for all three disciplines and emergency management and other things, to other states that may only have requirements if you do emergency medical dispatch, but not other things for the other two disciplines. So we recognize that there are some state initiatives that are already complete, and we're familiar with the fact that there are some states who are beginning to work on this issue and are going to be trying to address them. But we want to realize that what we do is a collective. If we come together, we'll have much better possibilities of actually getting this accomplished and making sure that the standard of care, again, is something that is the same across the board. There has been some work that has already been done, and some of that work has come out of the National 911 office. And Lori Flaherty, in her vision of trying to talk about this and potentially bring this topic to bear, had a meeting earlier this year where many stakeholders from different organizations, different training companies, different 911 centers from around the country were represented in a meeting, and where we talked about the different facets of the things that why it's important that we do this at this point, some of the stumbling blocks and things, as well as what types of things would we need to move forward to get this accomplished. And I think one of the critical things that we're going to be doing at the Critical Issues Forum is talking about and defining what would become the model in which we would try and move this forward. Recognizing that other entities, other public safety entities have been doing this over a number of years, and some of them have been very successful, and we want to look and learn from their lessons learned to make sure that we incorporate the things that are important and the things that they recognized as they went through their process. So defining an implementation model is one of those key things, as well as identifying the critical elements for the baseline new hire training. Again, we're talking about the floor in which everyone agrees that this is the minimum that must be done. We're not going to say you can't exceed. We're just saying that what we're wanting to define is what is the floor, and identifying that for not only training new hires, but supervisors, as well as talking about it for upper management as well. Again, looking at the implementation models and recognizing the positive and negative things that have happened from other entities who have tried to do this, and pulling from those strengths and trying to avoid their pitfalls as well. That implementation strategy then becomes who are the players in which this is going to be working from. You know, who are the entities in which we need to engage, whether they're people from NENA, APCO, PowerPhone, Priority Dispatch, and the academies. It could be all of those people, as well as recognizing that we're going to need buy-in from the chiefs of police and the fire chiefs and other entities that are out there, so that we can bring them into the fold and identify what their roles might be, and identify the steps in which we need to engage them and how we're going to engage them as we move forward. And finally, and I think what most everyone is probably interested in at the CIF, would be the beginning to develop a baseline framework in which we are going to utilize to make that baseline or floor of training for telecommunicators, supervisors, and upper management. So I think we cannot define everything that needs to be done in that framework in 2 short days, but we can begin to put into a pot of things that we all can kind of agree on that need to be in there, and we can then take that information and utilize this as a stepping stone into the future to make that transition, to engage in the further discussions that will be needed as we move forward in developing national training standards for telecommunicators and all levels of 911. So that is all I have. At this time, I'm going to transfer and give it over to our CEO, Brian Fonts.
Thank you very much, Ty, and thank you for participating in this webinar today. I want to thank Chris for organizing this. There isn't a week that goes by where I do not receive some form of communication about data and data analytics. Just yesterday, I picked up, or was sent to me electronically, the utilities fortnightly. And in that, there's an article that says, Big Data, Big Change, Analytics Chart a Path for Industry Transformation. The whole notion of data analytics has been increasing in interest across industry and across sectors for about the last 2 years, some certainly longer. And in the world of public safety, and more specifically 911, data analytics or data writ large has kind of a checkered development or past. By that I mean there are some PSAPs that are very much engaged in data analytics, data collection. Some have organized this on a statewide basis, and yet there are others who are not engaged in this in any rigorous form. So what we are attempting to do in this part of our Critical Issues Forum is to talk about data analytics, data collection, and the analysis of the data that are collected in 2 broad areas. The first area is taking a look at what this can do for the public safety answering point itself. In other words, it's looking in toward the PSAP. And in this situation, I think that data analytics will provide substantial information that will allow for predictive information about the operations of the 911 center and how 911 basically patterns or trends in a particular location. So there was a recent article by an IBM executive whose purpose is taking a look at data analytics. And he described just in the exhaust of data, meaning just in the daily spewing of information out there, that information can be culled and gleaned in order to ultimately provide some predictive capabilities for the operations of any organization or any company. So as we take a look at data analytics inside the 911 center, we can take a closer look at how the data correspond to what the management needs and resources are within that 911 center, within the PSAP authority, so that we may be able to gain a better understanding of how effective and efficient resource management can become. You may have an opportunity to kind of right-size your organization in terms of trunks that you pay for, and then ultimately you may be able to staff and organize your PSAP on what the predictive trends are for 911. So these are some of the things that can be examined with data looking inward to the PSAP, and I've only scratched the surface. And for those of you who are on this webinar who are involved in data analytics, you know what I mean by how deep you can go to gain an understanding of the operations of information coming from an outside source into the PSAP and how it's managed within the PSAP. Beyond just looking internally, there's a great opportunity to share this information to entities outside of the PSAP. And this is where I think a lot of work can be done to look at data from 911 centers and look at it in the aggregate, and then to do a deep dive on however you want to slice or dice that information, and then to share that information with a number of offices or agencies at the local level, state level, and in some cases nationally. For an example, 911 data may be able to reveal what intersections generate more 911 calls at any given time of the day, the week, the month, the season of the year, etc. So that over time you begin to have a predictive understanding of how these 911 calls work on the roadway systems within a community or a state or in the federal level. It also may provide valuable information so that any changes to the roadway systems to improve that interchange or that four-way stop sign could help benefit not only the 911 center, but certainly the individuals who may be in situations that will require dialing 911. You will also be able to provide information to other organizations in the community, the city manager, the city planner, on the amount of 911 calls, the types of calls, the time of day, day of week, season of the year, types of calls that are received by the center so that you would be able to further substantiate the value that your center provides to the overall community, thus underlying the need for funding. Likewise, you can go beyond just the local community and provide this information to the state and national agencies. Again, for an example, we've had a number of discussions with federal agencies here in Washington that's very interested in looking at data analytics and aggregate data from 911 centers. Department of Homeland Security would love to have a dashboard, just a simple dashboard that would say basically where the 911 centers are and if they are in a green, yellow, or red mode. That information would be valuable to those who are constantly managing a variety of sources of information to ensure the safety and security of whether it's a community, a state, or our nation as a whole. I think that beyond taking a look at just those types of data points for outside agencies, it will also provide for greater assistance and aid in real-time emergency management. I've already talked about the data that can be used for state and national dashboard capabilities for emergency management writ large. So here are some of the questions that can be asked and will be asked, and there are many more that are derived from this. What data are needed to enhance 911 services and PSAP management? How should data be presented within the PSAP? And likewise, how should data be made available? How frequently and to whom? How can data be aggregated and analyzed for use at the state, local, and national levels? And each one of these questions, I can assure you, have a whole subset of issues associated with them. So at this point, I'm getting a sign from Chris that we need to, that I can keep going. Great, thank you. I'm trying to read his sign language here. But in any event, what we can talk about in terms of the data analytics is also to examine how 911 is performing, if you will, in a particular area. For an example, we can have trend data on how many calls are coming in on phase 1 or phase 2. If we see any changes in the number of calls that are coming in phase 1, phase 2 over time. And that in itself may tell us that there are issues associated with just simple location information associated with a 911 call, whether that is something within a network that's delivering 911 calls, or if there is some issue with equipment inside the 911 center. So these are the types of data analyses and the analytics that would be helpful. Now, one of the things that was brought home to me day one in starting at NENA nearly 5 years ago, oftentimes, and I would say, I'm looking at Trey across the room here, I would say probably at least once or twice a week, we receive calls either from Congress, members of Congress, FCC, other agencies in town, wanting to know how many 911 calls are made each day, how many are made in a month, how many of them are wireless, how many of them are wireline, how many of them are VoIP. And unfortunately, at the national level, we have no dashboard here in our office that would be able to aggregate some very simple data points that would be able to provide this type of information to those policymakers here at the federal level. Now, if the federal agencies and representatives in those agencies and on the Hill are asking these questions, I would only assume that at the state and local level, those types of questions are being asked as well. So the more that we can provide these leaders at the local, state, and federal level with information about the value of our work, the overall frequencies of calls, how calls are coming in, whether it's, as I said earlier, wireless, wireline, or VoIP, can have a profound impact on policy issues at all levels of government. The rationale that I had initially for seeking this type of information was to provide a case for funding of 911, and particularly as we move into next generation 911. Oftentimes people just assume that 911 is going to be there. But until we speak with data, something that they can understand and would have applicability to the jobs that they have to do, we're speaking in a more muted tone than we would otherwise be able to speak. So I would hope that for those who are attending this Critical Issues Forum and this section dealing with data analytics, that we would come up with some common elements associated with dashboards that could be shared with others, some common elements that would be critical inside the PSAP to enable PSAPs to understand how they're performing, that they may be able to compare themselves to some national standard or state standard and so forth. So it's this type of work in data aggregation, data analytics, that will provide a greater voice, a greater focus as to what we are all about in the 911 world. You know this better than I. All too often, the individual taking the 911 call from someone in time of need is focused on serving that individual. And the ability to aggregate that information or to think of 911 in the aggregate is probably not the first thing coming across that professional's mind. Sure. And so our goal here is to work on developing some basic levels of data analytics, data aggregation that will benefit all of 911.
Thanks, Brian. And we did have our first question come in here, and I would encourage any of you who have questions or comments on data analytics and data aggregation as discussed by Brian, or on a national telecommunicator training standards discussed by Ty, please use your GoToWebinar interface, and we'll be happy to field as many as we can. The first one we have here is for you, Brian. Given the extremely complex nature of 911 statistics, how would standardization of numbers from various PSAPs be achieved?
I think certainly whoever asked the question asked a very exact question, a very valuable question. And you could have it as broad or as narrow as you would like. In a broad context, just the number of 911 calls divided by or subdivided into voice over, wireless, VoIP, and wireline 911 services. That in itself will provide just sheer numbers and the types of calls that are coming in. That will help individuals, certainly policymakers here at the Washington, D.C. level, and I would assume similar benefits to the state and local levels itself. So that is outward looking. The more you dive into the analytics, and if you are able to develop the standards for those analytics, in other words, these are the questions that we want to have asked, and in the format that we want to have asked, and this is how we are asking that the data be tabulated, formulated, and analyzed. That becomes certainly more difficult, more exacting. There are people out there, there are firms out there that do data analytics that are expert in being able to do that deeper dive. The question then becomes, are we capable of looking at some common, deeper dive questions, formats, and analytics that would cut across all PSAPs? And a lot of this can be done without anyone actually having to write anything down. This could be gleaned either from, in essence, the back end of the equipment inside the PSAP or at a switch at a different location. So I hope I've answered your question, and it's as wide as you want it to be or as narrow as you would like. And again, the narrower the focus and design, the more significant and deeper the analyses will become.
Okay, we've got a question for Ty here on the training standards. And how will the efforts or already established or already worked on efforts from other entities feed into the initiative put together by NENA and the National 911 Office?
Right. I see this couple of the questions specifically are talking specifically about the APCO standard that is in place. And I don't think that we're saying that we're trying to rework the APCO standard, and I don't believe that we're trying to put anybody away from it. We're just trying to create a conversation that gets us to a point where we have the standard accepted and adopted by every state, and so that we all are working from at least that same floor in which we that standard level of care is the same across any jurisdiction across the United States. It's not about reworking what is already done as much as it is to understanding what is there and identifying that there may be parts where there needs to be enhancements or additional things that people and collectively the industry wants to enhance. And if that's the case, then I think that is something that we need to address. But more than anything, I think what NENA is trying to do in this conversation with the National 911 Office is to move forward the discussion of creating a national standard that is adopted by every state, and so that everyone has that same standard of care and level of service, no matter where you're at, as well as some sort of potential for reciprocity. If I am at one jurisdiction, am trained, then I can go to another jurisdiction in another state, or maybe even in another jurisdiction next door, and I understand that I have that same minimum amount of training. That doesn't mean that I don't have to do some local training, but I may not have to go through the entire training system all over again because I've already met that criteria. So I think those are the key issues that we're trying to accomplish.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question for you, Ty. How do you plan on getting buy-in from different states, some of whom already have standards they may not want to part with?
And I think that is an important question. And I think that when we look at a minimum floor, that we have to understand that some states will already exceed what that minimum may be, and we wouldn't want to change them at all. Some states, like I said earlier, will have only one, maybe certain amount of training for one of the disciplines and need to just add on the other parts to make it more ubiquitous. So I think that the whole idea of looking at all of the standards that are currently out there in each state and different regions that have them, I think we will begin to glean from that some that will far exceed and others that will have to maybe raise their standards to get to the level in which the industry collective has decided to make the floor, in which that is minimum training.
Great. Thank you, Ty, and thank you, Brian, for both of you sharing your expertise today. We're about to wrap it up here. Of course, if you have any questions about the topics we've discussed, you can email our Critical Issues Forum team at CIF@NENA.org. As I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, in appreciation of your attending the live broadcast today, you'll be getting an email shortly with a discount code for reduced fees for the upcoming Critical Issues Forum. And of course, we encourage you to come to this event, to participate. Many of you out there are already committee and working group members. A lot more of you are looking to get involved, and these two issues are going to be really huge moving forward. There's going to be a lot of work done, not just learning, but work to move these issues forward at our event in Colorado. So we really hope that you will attend and make the best of your skills and help push everything forward with us. Again, you can get more information at NENA.org CIF. You can register online. You can download a paper form, and you can get the link to housing, which closes on September 12th. Thank you again. We'll be sending out emails to you shortly with the discount code and also the link to the archive if you missed any part of today's presentation. Have a great day, and we hope to see you at a future webinar.